In the late 14th century, Portugal was constructing ships that, while formidable, could not compare to the colossal vessels emerging from Ming China. These treasure ships possessed decks stretching as long as entire villages and towering masts that dwarfed any European counterpart. They were only a fraction of a massive fleet built by the Ming dynasty to assert dominance over neighboring states and intimidate potential foes. The sheer scale of these ships and the reputation of the admiral commanding them became legendary. The notion that craftsmen of the period could assemble structures of this magnitude strains credulity, yet history records that they did. This narrative begins with a boy kidnapped and mutilated in childhood who would later dominate the seas with ships the size of floating fortresses. He was born in Yunnan province, then under Mongol control, where his father served as a minor official. During a Mongol incursion, his father was killed, leaving the boy to wander the roads alone. He encountered a Ming general who inquired about the whereabouts of the Mongol emperor. The child, quick-witted, offered a misleading response, leaping into a nearby pond to avoid detection. Impressed by his cleverness, the general brought him into the service of Zheng He, the fourth son of the founding emperor of the Ming dynasty. Before he could ascend to influence, the boy underwent a radical transformation. The Ming Empire uniquely elevated eunuchs, men who had been castrated, to positions of trust, believing that those without heirs posed no dynastic threat and could devote themselves entirely to the emperor. Stripped of family and identity, eunuchs were trained rigorously, often surpassing literate officials in education. Many served as clerks or tax collectors, yet the most capable could become advisors wielding extraordinary influence. Zheng He, later known as the Yongle Emperor, took a personal interest in the boy. Physically, he grew to extraordinary proportions, his limbs elongated due to the lack of testosterone, granting him unusual strength and stature. During the early Ming period, with internal instability and a fragile border, his talents were applied first as a soldier, then officer, and eventually as Zheng He's personal bodyguard. He rose to command forces against Mongol incursions, proving his military acumen and becoming one of the most trusted eunuchs in the emperor's court. Unlike his father, Zheng He did not limit eunuchs' access to power. Drawing lessons from an allegorical story of fire tending, he understood the value of constant attention and persistence. Eunuchs like the boy, now known as Zheng He, became central to military and administrative operations. They gathered intelligence, managed distant expeditions, and ensured the emperor's directives were executed efficiently. This trust enabled the construction of the largest fleet the world had ever seen, capable of projecting Ming power across the Indian Ocean and securing tribute from distant states. The fleet was organized meticulously. 300 transport ships for men and supplies, 180 warships for combat, 240 supply vessels for provisions, and 700 horse ships transporting thousands of cavalry animals. At the center were 36 treasure ships, colossal structures 136 meters long, 56 meters wide, with 9 towering masts. Their hulls were reinforced, their decks layered for habitation, kitchens, command, and artillery. Bronze cannons lined the topmost deck, while ballast and keel designs allowed unprecedented stability in open seas. These ships carried exotic goods, animals, and precious materials, serving both as instruments of diplomacy and deterrence. Under Zheng He's command, the fleet sailed beyond India to the shores of modern Malaysia, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, harnessing the northeast monsoon winds. He protected trade routes and suppressed piracy, extending Ming influence to Hormuz and the eastern coast of Africa. Everywhere he traveled, rulers submitted, tribute flowed, and the Ming Empire demonstrated its power. For a brief period, this naval dominance represented a form of Pax Ming, the closest China came to overseas colonial expansion. However, internal resistance grew. Confucian officials resented eunuchs' authority, criticizing the voyages as extravagant and wasteful. In 1421, a lightning strike at the Forbidden City destroyed a major hall, interpreted as an omen. Despite temporarily halting shipbuilding, the emperor reinstated the fleet and continued maritime missions until his death. His successor, reliant on the civil bureaucracy rather than eunuchs, ended the expeditions, dismantling the fleet and closing an era of unmatched naval power. The scale of these ships remained the subject of debate. Historical records confirm a fleet of 249 vessels, including 63 treasure ships, far smaller than legendary accounts. Structural constraints, such as the limitations of timber, cast doubt on the feasibility of constructing the largest ships attributed to Zheng He. Nevertheless, archaeological finds, including a massive 11-meter-long timber near Nanjing, suggest that at least some vessels approached the extraordinary dimensions recorded in legend. Capable of supporting immense masts and rudders, scholars have long debated the true dimensions of these treasure ships. While some argue that the colossal sizes described in 16th-century texts were exaggerations, physical evidence suggests vessels far larger than typical contemporary ships did exist. The enormous timbers unearthed at the site of the Nanjing shipyards indicate a capacity to construct ships potentially exceeding 150 meters in length. Such ships would have been the largest wooden sailing vessels in human history, dwarfing even the most ambitious European designs by centuries. Despite these achievements, the extraordinary scale of the fleet could not be maintained indefinitely. The Ming dynasty's priorities shifted, and the political climate grew hostile to eunuch-led ventures. Subsequent emperors, wary of overreach and excessive expenditure, curtailed maritime expeditions and focused on consolidating power internally. As a result, the ships were dismantled, and the once mighty fleet faded from active service, leaving only fragments of its legend in official records and chronicles. The legacy of Zheng He and his treasure fleet endured in both myth and history. European accounts centuries later marveled at reports of gigantic vessels capable of carrying hundreds of men, cavalry, and unimaginable riches across vast oceans. Yet unlike European exploration, which relied increasingly on smaller, maneuverable ships, the Ming fleet embodied a philosophy of overwhelming power, diplomatic awe, and state-controlled trade. Each voyage was a display of imperial reach and technological sophistication unmatched in the early 15th century modern. Reconstructions and experimental archaeology underscore the engineering marvels of the Ming shipbuilders. Attempts to replicate the largest treasure ships reveal limitations in timber length, hull integrity, and mast stability, confirming the difficulties inherent in such monumental projects. Nevertheless, the historical and archaeological evidence paints a picture of a fleet that, while perhaps not as enormous as some accounts suggest, still represented the pinnacle of wooden shipbuilding, navigation, and logistical organization of its era. Ultimately, the treasure fleet was more than a collection of ships. It was a manifestation of Ming China's vision of global presence, a demonstration of maritime mastery and centralized authority. Zheng He, once a boy kidnapped and castrated, rose to orchestrate an operation of unprecedented scale, blending military prowess, diplomacy, and administrative skill. The fleet's voyages across the Indian Ocean, touching Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Persian Gulf, and East Africa, marked a singular moment when the Middle Kingdom projected power far beyond its shores. The dismantling of the fleet, coupled with the cessation of overseas expeditions, left an enduring enigma. Historical accounts became interwoven with legend, exaggerating the number, size, and scope of the treasure ships. Yet even the conservative estimates confirm that the Ming fleet represented an unparalleled maritime enterprise, unmatched in human history for its scale, ambition, and sophistication. Its influence persisted subtly, shaping regional trade patterns, diplomatic norms, and perceptions of Chinese power for generations. The story of Zheng He and the Ming treasure fleet remains a testament to ambition and ingenuity. It illustrates how a single individual, shaped by extraordinary circumstances, could influence the course of maritime history and project the power of an empire across thousands of miles of open ocean. While the ships themselves no longer exist, their memory endures in records, legends, and the occasional archaeological remnant, reminding us of a time when human engineering and imperial ambition reached for the horizon with unmatched audacity. By the early 16th century, the Ming treasure fleet had largely vanished from practical use, yet its impact lingered. Merchants, diplomats, and travelers spoke of ships of immense size and crews numbering in the tens of thousands. Stories of Zheng He's voyages crossed oceans and generations, inspiring awe and curiosity in both neighboring states and later European explorers. The cessation of these voyages was as much political as it was practical of his expeditions. The court bureaucracy, increasingly dominated by Confucian scholars, viewed extravagant naval projects as a drain on the treasury and a distraction from internal governance. The eunuchs, whose loyalty had enabled the fleet's creation, fell from favor after the deaths of emperors who had championed their authority. Over time, knowledge of shipbuilding techniques specific to the treasure fleet declined, and the monumental craftsmanship required to replicate such vessels was lost. Archaeological surveys around Nanjing and along former shipyard sites provide tantalizing glimpses into this lost world. Fragments of enormous hull timbers, fastenings, and anchor components suggest that while legends may have exaggerated the fleet's scale, its vessels were nonetheless far larger than typical contemporaneous ships. Maritime historians now agree that the largest treasure ships were likely the largest wooden ships ever built, with innovations in hull design, keel structure, and ballast systems that allowed unprecedented stability and carrying capacity. These technological advancements allowed Zheng He to maintain control over vast, multi-ship convoys across unpredictable seas. Troops, traders, scholars, and diplomats could be transported en masse, and foreign powers were compelled to acknowledge Ming authority through ritual submission and tribute. Unlike European explorers who relied heavily on small, versatile vessels to discover and colonize, the Ming fleet prioritized spectacle, intimidation, and centralized coordination, a projection of state power as much as a tool for trade. Despite the fleet's dissolution, its influence shaped subsequent Chinese naval design and maritime strategy, even if only indirectly. Knowledge of large-scale ship construction, navigation, and provisioning persisted in fragmented records and inspired later generations of shipbuilders and historians. Modern assessments, combining historical texts, archaeological evidence, and engineering analysis, suggest that while some aspects of the fleet were mythologized, the treasure ships represented a peak of maritime achievement that would not be rivaled for centuries. Ultimately, Zheng He's story reflects a convergence of personal resilience and imperial ambition. From a kidnapped child in Yunnan to the supreme commander of the world's largest fleet, his life embodies the extraordinary potential of individual talent harnessed to state power. The treasure fleet remains emblematic of a brief period when China's reach extended across the oceans, demonstrating mastery over shipbuilding, logistics, diplomacy, and military organization unparalleled in its era. Its disappearance serves as a reminder of how political shifts, economic priorities, and changing philosophies can erase even the greatest human achievements from practical use, leaving only history and legend to testify to their magnitude. The fascination with the Ming treasure fleet endures in both academic circles and popular imagination. Scholars continue to debate the fleet's true scale, purpose, and operational methods, often reconciling conflicting accounts from imperial archives, contemporary travelers, and later historical narratives. While early Western accounts tended to dismiss reports of enormous vessels as exaggeration, modern research acknowledges that the Ming dynasty possessed both the resources and expertise to construct ships far larger than anything Europe had yet attempted. Beyond the ships themselves, the fleet's voyages facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange. Diplomatic gifts, exotic animals, and rare goods moved between China and the coasts of Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Local rulers documented encounters with massive, heavily armed Chinese vessels, and some even adjusted their policies in recognition of Ming power. These interactions not only reinforced China's geopolitical dominance, but also enabled the transfer of knowledge, including navigational techniques, cartography, and maritime logistics across vast distances. Yet, the legacy of the fleet is also one of lost potential. Political shifts, court intrigues, and budgetary constraints ultimately curtailed further expeditions. The infrastructure that supported the fleet, the shipyards, supply depots, and skilled workforce, was gradually dismantled or repurposed, leaving behind only partial remnants. The scale of the enterprise was unmatched, and no subsequent Chinese emperor pursued a similar naval ambition, marking the treasure fleet as both a pinnacle and a singular episode in maritime history. Archaeological discoveries in the late 20th century have helped confirm elements of historical records. Timbers exceeding 10 meters in length, anchor remnants, and ballast stones testify to the enormous dimensions of the ships. Naval engineers analyzing these findings conclude that the vessels were not merely symbolic. They were fully operational, capable of carrying thousands of crew, soldiers, and cargo across open oceans. Modern reconstructions, though limited, suggest that the largest treasure ships could have exceeded 150 meters in length, dwarfing most contemporary European ships and rivaling the longest wooden ships ever attempted. The story of Zheng He and the treasure fleet also illuminates the interplay between imperial power and individual agency. The eunuchs, previously marginalized, were elevated to positions of immense authority, demonstrating the Ming court's willingness to entrust exceptional individuals with extraordinary responsibility. Zheng He's life, from his early hardships to commanding a fleet unmatched in scale and complexity, underscores how personal talent, strategic acumen, and political backing combined to achieve feats that remain legendary centuries later. The disappearance of the fleet did not erase its influence entirely. Its technological innovations, organizational methods, and diplomatic impact continued to echo through Chinese naval and maritime practice. Even as subsequent dynasties prioritized domestic stability over overseas projection, the records of the treasure fleet offered a benchmark of what was possible when ambition, expertise, and resources converged on an unprecedented scale. By the early 15th century, the Ming treasure fleet had become a symbol of the dynasty's supremacy. Zheng He's expeditions projected power far beyond China's shores, asserting a form of soft dominance that combined military presence with diplomacy and trade. The fleet's sheer size, the logistical precision required to provision and navigate thousands of men and animals, and the display of wealth on board created an aura of awe and intimidation that few states could match. Despite this, the internal politics of the Ming court gradually undermined the fleet's continuity. Confucian officials criticized the eunuch's influence and the enormous expenditures required for overseas campaigns. As imperial priorities shifted toward consolidating borders and internal administration, naval ambitions waned. After Zheng He's final voyage, subsequent emperors reduced or halted maritime projects, dismantling ships and reallocating resources to the northern defenses against the Mongols and other northern tribes. The cessation of expeditions marked the end of China's era of oceanic projection, leaving Europe as the next dominant maritime force centuries later. Archaeological evidence has helped validate aspects of Zheng He's voyages while tempering some of the more legendary claims. Excavated timbers, anchor fragments, and historical shipyard remnants indicate ships far larger than contemporary European vessels, though perhaps smaller than some historical accounts suggest. Analysis of these remains shows advanced shipbuilding techniques, including reinforced hulls, massive rudders, and multi-deck configurations that allowed stability in open ocean conditions. Scholars estimate that the largest ships could carry thousands of tons of cargo, hundreds of men, and dozens of cannons, an unparalleled logistical achievement of the time. The treasure fleet's routes extended from Southeast Asia to India, the Persian Gulf, and the eastern coast of Africa. Each journey was a carefully orchestrated operation involving diplomacy, trade, and military oversight. Zheng He's visits established tributary relationships, ensured the safety of maritime trade routes, and demonstrated China's naval dominance without outright colonization. This era of maritime influence, sometimes referred to as Pax Ming, exemplifies how naval power, economic strength, and political strategy were harmonized to project influence across oceans. Ultimately, the Ming treasure fleet represents both a zenith of pre-modern naval engineering and a cautionary tale about the fragility of ambition. Its construction and voyages showcased China's ability to mobilize enormous human and material resources, while its decline illustrates how political, economic, and ideological factors can abruptly end even the most impressive technological and logistical achievements. Today, Zheng He and his fleet remain enduring symbols of maritime innovation, diplomacy, and the extraordinary reach of the Ming dynasty. Modern historians and maritime archaeologists continue to debate the exact dimensions and scale of the treasure ships. While early records describe vessels exceeding 120 meters in length with multiple decks, practical analysis suggests that these accounts may have been exaggerated for political or literary effect. Excavations near Nanjing, the site of the original shipyards, uncovered colossal timbers and structural remnants indicating ships of unprecedented size for their era, yet likely somewhat smaller than the legendary figures. Even so, these remains confirm that Ming shipbuilders achieved a level of craftsmanship and engineering sophistication unmatched in the contemporary world. The design of these vessels reflects careful attention to both stability and versatility. Multiple decks allowed the separation of crew, cargo, and military functions, while massive rudders and keels ensured seaworthiness across vast distances and turbulent waters. Ballast systems, reinforced hulls, and specialized compartments for horses and exotic goods demonstrated a keen understanding of naval architecture. Combined with a disciplined crew of thousands, these ships could sustain extended voyages across the Indian Ocean, navigating seasonal monsoons and unpredictable storms with remarkable precision. Zheng He's fleet also illustrates the Ming dynasty's complex administrative capabilities. Organizing thousands of sailors, soldiers, merchants, and specialists required meticulous planning and coordination, from provisioning food and water to maintaining morale and discipline. Each expedition was effectively a mobile empire, capable of projecting authority, negotiating trade, and asserting Chinese influence along far-flung coasts. This level of operational sophistication highlights not only the technological achievement of the ships themselves, but the administrative and strategic acumen required to employ them effectively. Despite their achievements, the treasure fleet's disappearance from historical prominence underscores the impermanence of even the most ambitious enterprises. Political shifts, bureaucratic rivalries, and changing imperial priorities led to the gradual dismantling of ships and the cessation of long-range voyages. While Europe was beginning its age of exploration, China, despite its unparalleled maritime capability, turned inward. The treasure fleet became a memory, preserved in texts, legends, and the scattered remains of colossal vessels, inspiring fascination and study centuries later. The legacy of Zheng He and his fleet endures not only in historical records, but also in maritime engineering and navigational knowledge. These expeditions demonstrate that pre-modern societies could undertake oceanic ventures of astonishing scale, combining shipbuilding innovation, logistical expertise, and strategic diplomacy. The treasure ships remain a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the enduring allure of the sea, a story of power, precision, and the impermanence of even the greatest human achievements. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that, while the fleet's grandeur has often been magnified in later accounts, the Ming dynasty's naval expeditions were nevertheless among the largest and most sophisticated of their time. Ships that could carry thousands of men, horses, and tons of cargo were unprecedented in scale, with construction techniques that required a mastery of timber joining, hull reinforcement, and sail rigging far beyond ordinary shipbuilding practices of the 15th century. Surviving shipyard remnants, including massive keels, anchor stones, and tools, testify to a level of industrial organization capable of sustaining a fleet of dozens of such vessels simultaneously. Zheng He's voyages extended Chinese influence across the Indian Ocean, reaching Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the Persian Gulf, and the East African coast. Each port he visited bore witness to a display of imperial might. Soldiers, artillery, and exotic animals were symbols of authority, while the exchange of gifts and tribute reinforced China's position as a dominant maritime power. The fleet's presence was not merely ceremonial. It was a tool of diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, coercion, ensuring the Ming dynasty's interests were recognized across thousands of miles of open sea. Yet, the very success of these expeditions may have contributed to their decline. The enormous cost of maintaining and provisioning such a fleet placed immense strain on the imperial treasury. Bureaucrats within the Confucian civil service, wary of eunuch influence and concerned over resource allocation, increasingly questioned the necessity and prudence of these journeys. Over time, imperial priorities shifted toward defense and inland administration, resulting in the cessation of major maritime expeditions. Ships were dismantled, records became fragmented, and the once mighty fleet faded from practical use, leaving behind only accounts, legends, and scattered physical evidence. The treasure ships, even in partial reconstruction, remain among the largest wooden vessels ever documented. Their dimensions surpass anything Europe could achieve at the time, and the principles behind their construction, longitudinal keel systems, balanced ballast, multi-tiered decks, demonstrate an advanced understanding of maritime engineering. Attempts to replicate such ships in later centuries faced insurmountable structural challenges, revealing the ingenuity and audacity of Ming shipbuilders. Ultimately, the story of Zheng He and his fleet encapsulates the extraordinary capabilities of the Ming dynasty, a civilization capable of building ships the size of floating cities, projecting power across the oceans, and combining technology, strategy, and administration in a single awe-inspiring enterprise. Though time and politics curtailed further voyages, the legacy of these ships endures as a testament to human ambition, maritime mastery, and the fleeting yet monumental nature of historical achievement. Modern scholarship continues to debate the exact scale of Zheng He's fleet, but physical findings lend credence to the notion that the Ming dynasty achieved unprecedented maritime capabilities. Excavations near the historical shipyards in Nanjing have revealed massive timbers, some exceeding 10 meters in length, and anchor components large enough to secure vessels the size of modern warships. These remnants align with contemporary accounts describing ships with multiple decks, reinforced hulls, and sophisticated steering mechanisms capable of navigating monsoon winds and open ocean currents. Such evidence underscores that the Ming fleet was not mere legend, but a formidable reality, combining scale, power, and logistical sophistication unmatched by any contemporary maritime power. Despite the precision and organization of the fleet, historical records also hint at the human cost of such grand undertakings. Sailors, soldiers, craftsmen, and eunuchs labored for months, often in hazardous conditions, to maintain and man these immense vessels. Mortality rates were high, and the challenges of provisioning thousands of men and animals over extended voyages demanded meticulous planning. Yet the Ming administration ensured that each expedition could sustain itself far from home ports, carrying sufficient food, water, and supplies to remain at sea for months, if not years, while projecting imperial authority across distant lands. Zheng He's influence extended beyond mere power projection. The expeditions facilitated the exchange of goods, knowledge, and culture across vast distances. Exotic animals, fine silks, precious metals, and spices were transported across oceans, while foreign envoys and traders brought back knowledge of distant lands. This early form of global connectivity helped shape trade networks, diplomatic relations, and maritime practices for decades, even as subsequent emperors curtailed oceanic ambitions. Ultimately, the grandeur of Zheng He's fleet, the complexity of its logistics, and the audacity of its voyages reflect a peak in maritime history where human ingenuity, imperial ambition, and the mastery of natural forces converged. While later generations would forget the precise details, the tangible remains of timbers, anchors, and shipyard ruins, coupled with historical records, attest to a moment when China commanded the seas with ships rivaling floating fortresses. The legend of the treasure ships endures not merely as myth, but as a window into the extraordinary maritime prowess of the Ming dynasty. After Zheng He's final voyages, the Ming dynasty gradually shifted its focus inward. Imperial edicts curtailed large-scale maritime construction, redirecting resources to fortifying borders, maintaining the bureaucracy, and consolidating internal governance. The once mighty fleet was disassembled or left to decay, its massive timbers repurposed for palaces, temples, and city walls. Ships that had carried thousands of men and beasts across oceans were reduced to fragments, their power confined to memory and scattered records. The knowledge and expertise developed during these expeditions, however, did not vanish entirely. Shipbuilders, navigators, and scholars retained insights into hull construction, sailing techniques, and oceanic navigation. But without state sponsorship, the scale of ambition could not be maintained. Meanwhile, foreign observers and traders who encountered the fleet recorded their astonishment, contributing to a global awareness of China's unprecedented maritime capabilities. The legacy of Zheng He became both a source of pride and a cautionary tale about the limits of empire. Centuries later, modern historians and maritime archaeologists have revisited these accounts, cross-referencing textual records, naval architecture, and material evidence. While exaggerations likely embellished the fleet's dimensions in early chronicles, findings such as 11-meter-long timbers and anchors weighing multiple tons provide undeniable proof that these were enormous, seaworthy vessels. Scholars now recognize that even a conservative reconstruction of the fleet still represents one of the most ambitious naval undertakings in human history, unmatched in scale, organization, and logistical achievement prior to the industrial age. The story of Zheng He's treasure ships thus remains a powerful illustration of the interplay between ambition, engineering, and empire. It captures a period when a single state could command vast human and material resources, project power across thousands of miles of ocean, and leave a legacy that echoes through centuries. Even as subsequent policies limited maritime engagement, the historical and archaeological record preserves the memory of a fleet that once sailed farther, carried more, and displayed greater technical sophistication than any contemporary force. The shadow of these giant ships continues to fascinate, inviting modern observers to imagine the colossal vessels cutting through the monsoon winds, bearing the wealth, power, and ambition of the Ming dynasty to the far reaches of the known world. Today, the fascination with Zheng He's fleet is as much about human ingenuity as it is about imperial ambition. The size, design, and organization of the treasure ships challenge modern assumptions about pre-industrial naval engineering. While European ships of the same era were modest in comparison, the Chinese fleet demonstrated advanced structural solutions. Multi-decked hulls, reinforced keels, and modular ballast systems that allowed vessels to remain stable even in turbulent seas. The integration of living quarters, armament, storage, and command infrastructure into a single floating city reflects an unprecedented level of planning and sophistication. Yet, the mystique of the fleet is inseparable from the personal story of Zheng He himself. Once a child uprooted by war and tragedy, he rose through a society that required both loyalty and absolute devotion. As a eunuch, he was entrusted with authority and responsibility far beyond that of most men of his age or station, embodying a unique combination of physical stature, intellect, and discipline. His leadership, combined with meticulous imperial planning, transformed the Ming Navy into a tool of diplomacy, commerce, and intimidation, illustrating how individual ambition and state strategy can merge into an enduring historical force. In modern scholarship, debates continue over the exact dimensions and composition of the fleet. Yet the consensus remains clear. These voyages represented a peak of maritime power that would not be seen again for centuries. The fleet's disappearance from records does not diminish its significance. Rather, it underscores the fleeting nature of human achievement and the impact of political decisions on historical memory. Where once the oceans were traversed by colossal ships bearing exotic goods, horses and soldiers, the seas reverted to quieter trade routes, leaving the grandest wooden vessels to live on in legend and fragmented evidence. Ultimately, the legacy of the Ming treasure fleet is a testament to ambition, technical mastery, and the global reach of imperial China during the early 15th century. It reminds us that even in an age without engines or steel, human ingenuity could conceive and execute projects of extraordinary scale. The voyages of Zheng He were not merely journeys across water. They were a projection of a civilization's confidence, power, and organizational genius. Today, as historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts reconstruct their story, we gain insight into a world where the boundaries of possibility were tested by visionaries and craftsmen alike, leaving a maritime imprint that continues to captivate and inspire.